In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Worlds burn, titans stride through the ashes of once living cities. From orbit, exterminatus orders erase entire planets in moments. But in this endless storm of destruction, one question remains. What happens to those who were never meant to fight? The civilians, the workers, the faithful, the forgotten billions who live, suffer, and die unseen. They are the silent heartbeat of the Imperium, the ones who forge the bolter shells, who carry the wounded, who pray for deliverance under skies filled with fire. But when the guns of the Astra Militarum thunder and the skies crack with demonic invasion, they are the first to burn and the last to be remembered. Imagine a hive city, billions living shoulder to shoulder in choking darkness, their only light the glow of manufactorum furnaces. When war arrives, there's no escape. The air turns to poison, the streets drown in blood, and survival becomes a prayer whispered into deaf heavens. The Imperial Guard fights in the upper levels, while below, civilians are left to face starvation, disease, and madness. Some cling to faith, believing the Emperor watches them even as their children starve. Others lose hope, turning to forbidden cults that promise protection or vengeance. And when the Inquisition arrives, mercy is no longer a word that exists. One accusation of heresy, one whispered doubt, and entire populations vanish in purges meant to protect the Imperium. On other worlds, civilians are conscripted overnight, turned into human shields, cannon fodder, or servitors wired to machines. The Mechanicus harvests bodies for labor, the Ecclesiarchy harvests souls for faith, and the Commissars harvest fear to maintain control. For the Imperium, civilians are not people. They are resources, tools, sacrifices to keep the machine of war turning. And yet, despite all this suffering, they endure. Every day, new generations are born into war zones, never knowing peace, never hearing silence. Their lives are short, brutal, and forgotten. But their existence fuels the Imperium's survival. Without them, the Emperor's armies would crumble. Without their endless obedience, the Imperium would fall into ruin. This is their story, the unseen war of the powerless, the endless torment of those caught between gods and monsters. Today, we descend into the war-torn worlds of the 41st Millennium to uncover what truly happens to civilians during war in Warhammer 40K. Because in this universe, even innocence is a death sentence.
The civilians of the Imperium are its unseen foundation, the invisible masses upon whose shoulders the entire galactic machine of humanity rests. They are the countless souls who live and die in silence, nameless and faceless beneath the weight of a regime that neither sees nor values them as individuals. To the Imperium, a civilian is not a person but a function, an organic component in a system so vast that even planetary deaths are mere numbers in a ledger. On hive worlds, they labor endlessly in manufactorums where the air is thick with smog and the screams of machinery drown out thought. They wake before the light of the Emperor reaches their spire, and they work until their lungs fail or their hands can no longer hold the tools of production. The reward for their loyalty is survival, if that can be called a reward at all. The Imperium's rulers, its priests, and its generals rarely acknowledge the existence of these souls unless their productivity falters or their faith wavers. Across 1,000,000 worlds, the pattern repeats itself. Civilians toil in conditions that defy comprehension. On agri-worlds, they till the soil of dying planets to feed the armies of distant wars. On mining colonies, they dig into the flesh of the earth until their bodies are consumed by radiation and exhaustion. On forge worlds, they serve the machine god, their flesh replaced piece by augmetics until they are more tool than human. And on hive worlds, the majority live stacked upon one another in impossible numbers, entire generations never seeing the sky. Each civilian's life is a repetition of duty, labor, and fear. They live under the constant gaze of the Adeptus Arbitus, whose batons and bolters remind them that obedience is survival. Any hint of rebellion or apathy is met with swift, brutal punishment, for the Imperium cannot afford weakness among its countless billions. Even their faith is not their own, but dictated by the Ecclesiarchy. Civilians are taught from birth that their suffering is holy, that pain is a form of devotion, and that to die in service, whether on a battlefield or a factory floor, is to earn the Emperor's favor. Their misery is sanctified, their obedience glorified. They whisper prayers as they weld armor plates for tanks they will never see, or sew uniforms for soldiers they will never meet. Every task, no matter how small, is framed as a sacred offering. It is not love that binds them to the Imperium, but indoctrination and terror. They are told that beyond the Imperium lies only darkness, xenos, chaos, and annihilation. The truth is that for many, that darkness might be kinder than the life they endure. When war comes, the civilians' position grows even more desperate. Entire populations are conscripted overnight to support the war effort. Manufactorums switch from civilian production to weapons manufacturing, forcing the population into longer shifts with dwindling rations. Food shortages become rampant, disease spreads unchecked, and fear becomes the air they breathe. Still, they work, because refusal means execution. The administratum's quotas must be met no matter the cost. In times of planetary invasion, they are the first to suffer and the last to be evacuated, if evacuation is even considered. Often, the military sees them as liabilities, clogging transport routes, consuming supplies and creating chaos. And so, they are left behind to face the horrors that follow in the wake of war: bombardment, occupation, and extermination. In the eyes of the imperial commanders, civilians are tools of utility. They can be pressed into service as laborers, scouts, or expendable militia. They are ordered to dig trenches, build fortifications, or carry ammunition under fire. The lucky ones die quickly. The unlucky are captured by enemies or sacrificed to the whims of the Inquisition, who suspect heresy and every act of desperation. Civilians fleeing the front lines are branded cowards or traitors, their fear mistaken for rebellion. Commissars do not distinguish between soldier and citizen when enforcing discipline. To the Imperium, maintaining control is more important than preserving life. Yet, even under this suffocating oppression, the will to live persists. Civilians adapt to the cruelty that surrounds them. They form hidden networks to share food, medicine, and information. In the lower levels of hive cities, families huddle in makeshift shelters, whispering forbidden prayers that the Emperor might someday see their suffering. Mothers comfort their children with stories of saints and angels, even as the sky glows red from orbital bombardments. Hope becomes a fragile weapon, something to cling to in a universe that offers none. But hope can take darker forms. When faith in the Imperium fails, civilians seek salvation elsewhere. Chaos cults spread easily among the desperate, offering protection, power, or merely an end to pain. The imperial creed brands them heretics, yet few of these converts begin with evil intent. They are simply broken people searching for meaning in a world that has stripped them of everything. Some worlds fall not because of enemy invasion, but because their civilian populations turn inward, consumed by despair and corruption. The Imperium responds with purges and exterminations, wiping out millions to cleanse the taint of heresy, never realizing that its own cruelty sowed the seeds of rebellion. Still, the Imperium endures because its civilians endure. Their suffering is the mortar that binds the Imperium's crumbling structure. For every world lost, 10 more continue to produce, feed, and fight. Their labor powers the war machines of the Astra Militarum, their prayers fuel the faith of the Ecclesiarchy, and their deaths serve as reminders that life in the Imperium has only one true purpose: to serve. Even the most powerful space marine owes his existence to countless unseen hands. The farmers who grew his food, the forgewrights who built his armor, the scribes who recorded his victories. Without the masses, the Imperium would collapse in an instant. Yet, in the grand tapestry of the 41st millennium, they remain invisible threads, easily torn and quickly replaced. They are the anonymous billions who will never be remembered, their names unrecorded in any archive, their graves unmarked beneath the ruins of cities that no longer exist. They are born into servitude and die in silence, their only legacy the continued survival of a decaying empire that neither loves nor acknowledges them. Every bolt shell fired, every ship that sails the void, every cathedral raised in the Emperor's name stands upon their broken bodies. They are the true soldiers of the Imperium, though they will never be honored as such, for their war is one of endurance, not conquest. Their battle is not fought with weapons, but with obedience, faith, and suffering. And it is a battle that never ends.
When a world of the Imperium comes under siege, the experience for its civilians is beyond comprehension. A hive city, already overcrowded and suffocating under its own decay, becomes a living tomb once the sirens of invasion sound. The skies darken as enemy ships enter orbit, and the booming voice of the planetary governor echoes through voxcasters, declaring that the Emperor protects. But the Emperor's protection is a distant promise, and for the billions below, war is not a glorious crusade. It is a nightmare that consumes everything. The upper spires, where the nobility and officials live, become fortresses protected by private guards and elite regiments, while the lower levels, where the vast majority of civilians dwell, descend into panic and chaos. People trample one another in the mad rush for food, for shelter, for any illusion of safety. Families are torn apart as the Arbites impose curfews and martial law. Streets once filled with traders and pilgrims turn into rivers of desperate humanity, choking on fear and smoke. When the first bombardments begin, the world itself seems to scream. Orbital fire rains from above, flattening manufactorums, hab blocks, and temples alike. Civilians have nowhere to run. There are no bunkers large enough for billions, no transports to carry them away. Those fortunate enough to find a shelter huddle in darkness, listening to the sound of their world breaking apart. Entire city sectors are erased in seconds. Vox networks collapse, power grids fail, and water systems are poisoned or destroyed. In the Underhive, where survival was already a daily struggle, the bombardments are less a shock and more a cruel continuation of what life always was, just louder, brighter, and deadlier. Yet even then, some continue their work, for the Imperium demands that production never stop. Machine priests lash terrified workers to their stations, declaring that to cease labor is heresy. So they work as fire and ruin consume the world above them. As enemy troops land, the war becomes intimate. It is no longer a distant exchange of orbital strikes, but a brutal fight in the streets. Civilians find themselves caught between the advancing enemy and the retreating Imperial forces. Those who try to flee are cut down by crossfire, while others are pressed into service by the guard, handed a lasgun, and told to die for the Emperor. The Astra Militarum fights valiantly, but their defense often depends on turning civilian districts into kill zones. Apartment blocks become fortifications, schools become command centers, and shrines become makeshift hospitals. The living quarters of the poor become battlegrounds, and the dead pile up faster than they can be buried. In the chaos, looters and opportunists emerge, scavenging from corpses, hoarding food, and preying on the weak. The Imperium's response to disorder is ruthless. The commissars execute deserters and panic spreaders without hesitation. The Arbites carry out purges of the underhive, burning out gangs and suspected heretics who might aid the invaders. Civilians learn that in war, death can come as easily from their own protectors as from their enemies. Propaganda floods every Vox network that still functions. The Ecclesiarchy broadcasts sermons declaring the siege a test of faith. "Endure, for the Emperor watches," they say, as if endurance could shield against shells and plasma fire. The priests walk among the dying, blessing them, promising salvation in death. Some civilians believe, clinging to that fragile hope. Others lose all sense of faith, their prayers turning into screams of hatred and despair. As the siege drags on, resources vanish. Food stores are looted or destroyed, and ration cards become meaningless scraps of paper. Starvation spreads faster than the enemy's advance. Disease follows, thriving in the unburied dead and stagnant water. The air becomes thick with the stench of rot and smoke. The administratum's orders continue to pour in: maintain production, obey curfew, report heresy. But those who once obeyed now struggle simply to stay alive. Parents kill for a loaf of corpse starch. Children go missing, taken by gangs, cults, or worse. The thin line between loyalty and desperation dissolves completely. Enemy occupation brings new horrors. Whether the invaders are heretics, xenos, or demons, they see civilians as either tools or toys. Chaos warbands revel in slaughter, turning entire populations into offerings for their dark gods. Eldar raiders strike with surgical precision, taking slaves or corpses for purposes beyond mortal understanding. Orc invasions are loud, brutal, and unrelenting, leaving behind nothing but bones and wreckage. Tyranids do not invade. They consume, stripping flesh from the world itself until nothing remains. And when the Imperium eventually returns to reclaim what was lost, they find only ashes and silence. But the cost of victory is as merciless as defeat. The cleansing of a retaken world often includes exterminating its surviving population to prevent corruption from spreading. Even during the siege itself, the High Command makes cold calculations. Civilians are numbers on a tactical display, statistics to be sacrificed if it ensures a military advantage. Strategic bombardments are ordered on residential zones to deny cover to the enemy. Entire districts are declared lost and purged by orbital fire to prevent infection or infiltration. In the logic of the Imperium, 1 million dead civilians mean nothing if it saves a single squad of soldiers. To them, this is not cruelty, it is necessity. Mercy is a luxury long abandoned in the 41st millennium. The idea of protecting the innocent no longer exists, only protecting the Imperium. Still, amidst the carnage, fragments of humanity persist. Civilians organize themselves into small groups, scavenging supplies, creating secret passageways through the ruins, hiding the wounded, and preserving relics of faith. They form makeshift communities in basements and catacombs, clinging to the last vestiges of civilization. Sometimes Imperial soldiers find strength in these survivors, drawing courage from their endurance. Other times, these pockets of resistance are discovered by the Inquisition and wiped out, labeled as potential cults. There is no consistent mercy, no predictable justice. Survival itself becomes an act of rebellion. In some sieges, the horrors grow so vast that the defenders turn their weapons on their own world. When the risk of corruption or complete collapse becomes too great, the order is given: exterminatus. The planet is deemed beyond saving, its population too tainted or too broken to be allowed to exist. The skies ignite as virus bombs and cyclonic torpedoes descend, reducing a once thriving world to ash and glass. The civilians who once believed the Emperor watched over them vanish in fire and silence. Those who survive such purges are few, often left mutated, haunted, or insane. And yet, their stories rarely reach beyond their ruined worlds. Every siege across the Imperium follows this same cycle of despair. A planet is besieged, its civilians suffer, die, or vanish, and life elsewhere continues as if nothing happened. The Administratum records the event, assigns new production quotas to another world, and the machine grinds on. To the Imperium, these sieges are routine operations, not tragedies. The suffering of civilians is as ordinary as sunrise, as common as death. For those who live through it, the war never truly ends. The ruins become their inheritance, their memories carved into the broken stone of what used to be home. They are left to rebuild with nothing, haunted by the sound of bombardment that never really fades from their minds, a sound that defines their existence in a universe that has forgotten them entirely.
When war consumes a world, the Imperium faces a decision that reveals the true cruelty of its nature: who will be saved and who will be left behind. Evacuation or extermination, mercy or annihilation. In the vast bureaucracy of the Imperium, these are not moral choices but calculations made by distant men and women who will never see the faces of those their decisions condemn. Civilians exist as numbers on a data slate, their worth measured in productivity, loyalty, or strategic value. When the enemy descends, the Adeptus Administratum and the Imperial Guard coordinate responses that prioritize military assets, not human lives. Evacuation ships are reserved for officers, priests, tech adepts, and those deemed essential to the war effort. The masses, those who forge, farm, and serve, are rarely even considered. They are too many, too expendable, and too far below notice. To save them all would require resources the Imperium will not spend and compassion it no longer remembers. When an invasion begins, Vox orders echo through every hive, manufactorum, and settlement. Civilians are told to remain calm, to continue working, to trust in the Emperor's plan. In truth, no rescue is coming. The planetary defense forces know that evacuation for billions is impossible. The few ships available are already requisitioned for the military or the nobility. The desperate flood the spaceports, clawing and fighting for a place aboard transports that will never lift off. The arbites form cordons using shock mauls and bolters to keep order. Those who break ranks are executed in the streets as examples to others. In the chaos, families are torn apart, children lost, and entire districts sealed off to contain panic. The upper hives, where the elite dwell, become walled fortresses of privilege, guarded by soldiers while the rest of the world burns. There are exceptions, rare worlds where evacuation is attempted, but even these efforts are brutal. Civilians are herded like cattle, their names logged and their identities stripped as they are sorted according to usefulness. Skilled laborers, technicians, and Medicae are prioritized, while the unskilled masses are left to die. Every transport is filled beyond capacity, and still millions remain behind, watching as the sky fills with fire. For every ship that escapes, 10 more are destroyed before they can break orbit. The Imperium does not pause to mourn them. Their sacrifices recorded, categorized, and filed away in the endless archives of the Administratum, forgotten before the ink dries. When evacuation fails or is deemed unworthy, the alternative is far darker: extermination. The decision to destroy one's own world is not made lightly, but it is made often. The reasoning is always the same: better to deny the planet to the enemy than risk corruption, infestation, or heresy. The order comes through coded transmission, sealed with the authority of the Inquisition or a Lord General. Once given, it cannot be rescinded. The civilians below, still clinging to the hope of salvation, hear the warning only when it's too late. Sky sirens blare across continents as orbital bombardments begin. The surface trembles, oceans boil, and cities vanish under sheets of flame. There are no targets, only cleansing. Those who look to the heavens for deliverance see only fire. The logic of the Imperium's extermination is mercilessly efficient. If a world has fallen to chaos, the taint is seen as incurable. If Xenos forces dominate its surface, the planet is already lost. If the population revolts or succumbs to despair, it is branded heretical and purged. A single Inquisitor's declaration can condemn billions. To those in orbit, it is a necessary act of faith. To those on the ground, it is the end of everything. Civilians die believing they are being saved, praying to the Emperor as the fire consumes them. Even the soldiers ordered to carry out these purges see it as holy duty. They do not question, they obey. Disobedience is heresy, and heresy is death. In the rare moments when mercy is shown, it is not out of compassion, but utility. The Adeptus Mechanicus might preserve a population if their labor is valuable. The Ecclesiarchy may evacuate select groups of the faithful to repopulate shrine worlds elsewhere. The Guard might spare civilians to act as conscripts or guides through familiar terrain. But mercy in the Imperium is always conditional, always transactional. Civilians are tools to be used, not lives to be saved. Even when rescued, they are subject to suspicion, interrogation, and re-education. The Imperium trusts no one, not even its own people. Survival itself can be considered evidence of heresy. For those left behind during evacuation, the horror continues in silence. Entire cities crumble under bombardment, and the survivors wander through the ruins, searching for food, water, or meaning. Some band together in ragged groups, trying to flee into the wastelands or underhive tunnels. Others retreat into faith, holding desperate vigils in the ruins of cathedrals, their prayers drowned by the sound of bombardments. Many go mad. Some turn to dark powers, begging the warp for protection when the Imperium has abandoned them. For them, damnation is not a choice, it is the only remaining hope. The cycle feeds itself. Abandonment breeds heresy, heresy justifies extermination, extermination purifies the records, and the Imperium moves on. The administration records each extermination with bureaucratic indifference. Forms are filed, losses are calculated, and new colonization schedules are drawn up. A world erased is merely a gap to be filled in some future century. To the average imperial official, the death of 1 billion civilians is less meaningful than the loss of a single warship. The scale of the Imperium's population has stripped all sense of empathy from its rulers. Civilians are not mourned, they are replaced. Their deaths are not tragedies, they are logistics. On the ground, survivors whisper stories of ships that might return, of reinforcements that will save them, of the Emperor's unseen hand guiding them through the fire. Those stories keep them alive for a few more hours or days, but salvation never comes. The enemy scours what remains, looting, enslaving, or consuming what little life is left. In the void above, the war continues as if the planet below no longer exists. The Imperium's fleets move on to the next campaign, and the cycle begins anew. For the civilians of the Imperium, evacuation and extermination are two sides of the same fate. Both strip them of identity, both render their lives meaningless within the vast machinery of endless war. They are moved, used, or destroyed as required by strategy, their prayers unheard, their suffering unrecorded. In a galaxy where survival itself is an anomaly, to be chosen for evacuation is a miracle, but to hope for it is almost always a lie.
When the guns fall silent and the banners of war are lowered, the world that remains is little more than a graveyard. The aftermath of war in the Imperium is not victory or peace, but ruin. Cities lie in ashes, oceans boil with toxins, and the air itself becomes poison. The grand cathedrals once filled with hymns to the Emperor stand shattered and silent, their spires jutting like broken bones against the blood-red skies.
Civilians crawl from the wreckage, dazed and hollow, unsure whether to thank the Emperor for their survival or curse him for allowing them to live through such horror. The soldiers move on to the next campaign, the fleets depart, and what is left behind is a wasteland of the forgotten. The true war begins only after the battle ends, the war to stay alive in a world stripped of everything that made life possible. The first days after a conflict are chaos. Infrastructure is gone. Vox lines are dead, power grids shattered, water reserves polluted with ash and blood. Those who survived the bombardment face starvation, disease, and madness. Entire districts are filled with unburied corpses, their stench attracting vermin and spreading pestilence. The surviving administratum officials attempt to re-establish control, setting up ration points and labor camps, but their numbers are too few, their authority too weak. The Arbites enforce order with brutality, shooting looters and deserters in the streets, yet even their presence fades as resources dwindle. The chain of command collapses. Every man, woman, and child become their own desperate authority, clinging to scraps of food and faith. The imperial creed remains the only unbroken structure. Priests and missionaries move through the ruins, preaching that the emperor's gaze still watches over them. Some believe, most are too numb to care. In the ruins, families search for one another among the rubble, calling out names that will never be answered. Children wander aimlessly, covered in dust, their minds shattered by what they've seen. Some are taken by scavengers and slavers who emerge from the shadows, thriving in the chaos that follows every campaign. The Underhive gangs reclaim their territories, turning the remains of civilization into their new empires. The weak are consumed. The strong become predators. The Imperial Guard, if still stationed nearby, uses what little supplies remain to rebuild the fortifications instead of feeding the survivors. The logic is cruel but simple. The war may have ended here, but another will soon begin, and preparation takes precedence over compassion. Disease follows hunger. The bodies of the dead contaminate the air and water, spreading plagues that kill faster than bullets. Medici facilities are overwhelmed or destroyed, and the survivors turn to superstition for cures. They smear ash on their skin, whisper prayers, and drink from poison streams. The Ecclesiasticus declares these trials divine punishment for sin, urging repentance instead of treatment. The Mechanicus scavenges through the wreckage, salvaging machines and relics while ignoring the pleas of the dying. To them, flesh is temporary, only the machine endures. In this new order of decay, human life is the least valuable resource. The Imperium's great war machine continues elsewhere, fed by fresh recruits and new worlds, while the conquered and the saved are left to rot together. The psychological wounds run deeper than the physical ones. Civilians who survive a planetary war are haunted forever. The sounds of bombardment echo in their minds long after the sky clears. They flinch at the hum of engines, tremble at the sight of light from orbit, fearing it might be another attack. Many go mad, wandering through ruins, speaking to ghosts, praying to the Emperor, or cursing him in the same breath. Suicide becomes common, a final rebellion against a universe that no longer offers purpose. Others form small communes or cults, trying to rebuild something resembling community, though even these are fragile. Hunger, paranoia, and fear eventually tear them apart. The Imperium will one day reclaim the planet, sending new colonists and workers, but those who lived through the war will never be trusted again. Survival breeds suspicion, and suspicion invites the Inquisition. When the Inquisition arrives, the aftermath becomes an Inquisition of its own. Every survivor is questioned, examined, and judged. They're asked how they survived, who they prayed to, what they saw. Those who hesitate or speak of visions are branded tainted. The purges begin anew. Camps are built not for safety but for containment. The civilians who endured the war now face interrogation, their endurance twisted into evidence of corruption. Many are executed, others are sent to penal colonies or servitor conversion. The Imperium fears survivors just as much as it fears heretics. For those who live through the worst often see the truth, that the Emperor's protection is not mercy, but control.
Economically, the aftermath is ruinous. The manufactorum that used to feed the imperial war machine lies silent, their workers dead or scattered. Rebuilding falls to the same exhausted civilians who lost everything, forced into labor under the supervision of the administratum. Rations are their only payment, prayer their only reward. The ecclesiastikists hold mass ceremonies in the ruins, declaring the devastation of victory for faith. Hymns echo through burned-out streets as statues of saints are erected on top of piles of rubble. To outsiders, it appears as if the world is being reborn. But to those living within it, the reality is that nothing has changed. The suffering merely takes a new form. The war is over, but the oppression endures, sanctified by the same institutions that caused it. Children born after the conflict grow up among ruins, playing beside craters and skeletal buildings. They are taught to see the devastation not as tragedy, but holy proof of the emperor's strength. Their schools are sermons, their games mimic war, their lullabies are prayers to the emperor. In time, they will forget that their world was ever anything else. This is how the Imperium sustains itself, by turning memory into myth, transforming catastrophe into doctrine. The people who lived through the suffering become relics of a story rewritten by priests and scribes, their pain edited out, their defiance erased. As decades pass, the scars of the war remain visible even as the planet begins to function again. Entire regions are uninhabitable, filled with radiation and toxic dust. The ruins of cities become holy sites, pilgrimage grounds where believers come to witness the glory of the Emperor's cleansing. In reality, these places are graveyards where the bones of civilians still lie buried beneath the rubble. The Imperium does not rebuild for the people. It rebuilds for production. The new manufactorum rise upon the foundations of the old, powered by fresh laborers imported from other worlds. The survivors, if any remain, are relocated to slums or servitude, their existence forgotten by the very empire they sustained. The cycle of aftermath never ends. War comes, destruction follows, and what is left behind is a wasteland of the forgotten. Civilians who once dreamed at peace learn that peace is an illusion, a brief pause between tragedies. The Imperium celebrates its endurance, but endurance for the civilians means only continued suffering under the same banners that once promised salvation. The planet might heal in centuries, the ruins might fade, but the memories linger in those who saw everything taken from them, who lived long enough to understand that in the Imperium, survival itself is not a gift, but another kind of curse.
Faith is the final refuge of the helpless in the Imperium of man. For civilians trapped in the eternal machinery of war, belief in the Emperor is not just religion, it is survival. In the smoke-choked ruins of hive cities and on the ash-covered plains of bombed worlds, faith becomes the only thing left to hold on to when everything else has been burned away. The priests of the Ecclesiarchy walk among the dying with torches and relics, their voices rising above the screams and gunfire, declaring that every death, every loss, and every act of suffering is part of the Emperor's divine plan. Civilians cling to these words because there is nothing else. Their homes are gone, their families lost, their future erased, and in that void, faith becomes both comfort and weapon. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, faith is not a gentle light. It is a desperate fire. Civilians kneel in the mud, whispering the same prayers their ancestors spoke for millennia, believing that if they suffer enough, the Emperor will notice them. They pray as bombs fall, as plague consumes their loved ones, as their children are taken by conscription officers. The imperial creed teaches that pain is purity, that obedience is sanctity, and that sacrifice is love. For the common man, these words are chains disguised as hope, yet they hold on, because letting go of belief means facing the truth, that the Emperor does not hear them,
that the Imperium's endless wars are not fought for salvation, but for survival. The Ecclesiarchy understands this perfectly. Its power lies not in compassion, but in control. In every settlement, even the most broken, a shrine stands at the center, its walls decorated with candles made from human fat, its altars stained with blood from self-flagellation rites. Priests roam the ruins shouting sermons about duty, turning suffering into virtue. When food runs out, they preach fasting. When disease spreads, they call it divine testing. When war returns, they call it holy cleansing. The civilians obey because defiance is death. Faith becomes a ritual of fear of heresy, fear of damnation, fear of being seen as ungrateful for the emperor's supposed mercy. The moment a man questions the faith, the moment he wonders aloud why the emperor allows such pain, he is marked, reported, and often executed before sunset. But faith in the Imperium is not uniform. It fractures under pressure, mutates, and festers. In the ashes of war, new cults are born. Civilians, broken and desperate, twist the emperor's image into something personal, something that promises survival. Some believe he manifests through blood and sacrifice. Others claim his angels walk among them, disguised as soldiers or machines. These heretical beliefs spread fast in devastated worlds where the Ecclesiarchy's grip has weakened. A woman who lost her children may build an altar of their bones, believing it pleases the emperor. A starving family may eat the flesh of the dead, calling it a sacred communion. To the Inquisition, these are acts of heresy. To the people, they are acts of faith in a world where faith is all they have left. The Inquisition's response is merciless. When whispers of deviation reach their ears, the purges begin anew. Civilians are rounded up, questioned, tortured, and burned. Whole districts vanish under the accusation of heretical worship. The screams of the innocent mixed with the chants of the faithful, echoing through the ruins like hymns of despair. Yet even as fire consumes them, many still cry the emperor's name. The Imperium calls this purity of devotion, but in truth, it is madness born from centuries of indoctrination. When a person's entire existence has been shaped by fear and prayer, they no longer know how to live without it. They would rather die believing than survive in doubt. For some civilians, however, faith transforms into resistance. Quietly, secretly, they begin to question. They look upon the sky and see not the emperor's light, but the uncaring void. They whisper forbidden thoughts to one another in the dark, wondering if the Imperium truly serves humanity or only itself. These whispers are dangerous, more dangerous than any weapon. One sentence, one doubt spoken aloud, can doom entire families. Yet once faith begins to crack, it cannot be repaired. Some flee into the wilds or into the ruins, becoming ghosts who reject both the emperor and chaos. They live as outcasts, hunted by both imperial and heretical forces, existing in a void between damnation and freedom. In other cases, faith becomes corrupted not by rebellion, but by excess. When a civilian's devotion deepens beyond reason, they become zealots. They flagellate themselves until their flesh hangs loose. They march into battle with relics made from human remains. They burn their own kin for perceived blasphemy. The Ecclesiarchy praises such acts as holy fervor, even as they tear communities apart. In times of war, zealots are tools, useful to inspire fear, to control, to remind others what obedience looks like. The tragedy is that these people believe themselves blessed.
Their madness is sanctified, their cruelty justified, their suffering glorified. Children grow up watching their parents die for faith. They see priests preaching salvation beside mass graves, commissars executing heretics who simply begged for mercy. They are taught that the emperor loves those who obey and punishes those who doubt. This doctrine seeps into their minds until faith becomes reflex, an instinct that overrides reason. They pray before eating, before sleeping, before breathing, terrified that one forgotten prayer might condemn them. Even their dreams are filled with visions of fire and judgment. To them, faith is not comfort, it is obligation, an endless test they can never pass. And so the cycle continues, generation after generation, with each new war reinforcing the belief that suffering is sacred. The paradox of the Imperium's faith is that it sustains and destroys in equal measure. It keeps civilians alive long enough to serve, to work, to rebuild. It gives them a sense of purpose when all else is stripped away. Their prayers feed the machine of war just as surely as their bodies do. Each death becomes an offering, each tear a tithe. Even in silence, even in despair, the civilian's faith keeps the Imperium alive. Without it, the empire would collapse. With it, humanity endures, but only as a shadow of what it once was, worshipping a corpse on a golden throne, waiting for salvation that will never come.